First side, perfect. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the New Now. I'd like to begin this very short presentation with a very simple question. Whom do we mean when we use the word we? As much as we might wish it otherwise, there is no collective we. We are gathered here in Berlin and in dozens of other places around the world to think about the new now. But I want to say very clearly that for most of us, the new now is not new at all. In fact, it's a pretty old story. Restrictions on travel, the bureaucracy of migration, unequal access to healthcare, precarious job security. This is not the new now. This is the same old, same old. Two things happened last year that have dominated our lives. The pandemic, of course, and the protests, which began with Black Lives Matter, but spread like wildfire to encompass all kinds of urgent issues, from global warming to full-body suits for gymnasts, to understanding that mental health is also a public health issue. The official or long title of my short talk today is Pandemic and Protest, Africa as the Laboratory of the Future, but its real title is Signs Taken for Wonders, a reference to Homi Bhabha's 1985 article that showed how the English novel was the sign for a whole world order and not simply a book. In other words, the novel represented a way of seeing the world through the lens of empire and understanding one's place in it that is as potent today as it was 40 years ago. The pandemic and the protests are also signs in that they are representations, like the English novel, of a much more complex network of power, privilege, capital, and control. Of the two, it is only the pandemic that is still on everyone's minds. For most of the world, the protests have largely faded. But the rare combination of extreme interconnectedness and extreme isolation of the past 18 months has opened up new and potentially rich reflective spaces for all of us, if we know what to look for and if we are able to see it. The Chilean documentary filmmaker Patricio Guzman is probably best known for his 2010 film, Nostalgia for the Light. It explores the relationship between astronomers who flock to the Atacama Desert in Chile to look millions of light years into space to try and understand humanity's past, and the many Chilean women who still search the desert for remains of their relatives executed during the dictatorships of the 70s and 80s. That ability to hold multiple scales of time, to look back 500 years, 45 years, or 5 days, and still be able to think about the future, will be one of the most important challenges these next few months will throw at us. There are many things that we can say about the future, and none truer than this statement on the back of a taxi parked somewhere in Accra. It changes indeed. They say that there are 3 mistakes we commonly make when thinking about the future. One is to assume that nothing will change, that everything will remain the same. The second is to assume that everything will change and that nothing will stay as it was. The third and most dangerous is not to think about it at all. I've spent almost half my life outside Africa and half within. I'm now in the very beginning stages of a new project to build a new type of institute, part School of Architecture and part public events platform. The African Futures Institute is both a product of and a response to the pandemic and the protests, but it first began to form as an idea about 30 years ago. The British Ghanaian architect, Sir David Adjaye, has often spoken about having to become the kind of architect he wanted to see. I read this statement as a first-year student in London in the 1980s. And the AFI was born partly out of the desire to prove him wrong, but more importantly, as I've since discovered, it also came for the need to understand his statement as one of those signs taken for wonders, a convenient but ultimately dangerous myth. For the most part, my work as an educator over the past 30 years has been about the complex, challenging, and yet also wonderfully rich, expressive, and creative relationship between architecture, race, and identity, and the difficulties of translating that intuition, that this relationship does have something to do with the way that we live, think, and behave around one another. It is a relationship that in the right hands and in the right place does begin to address the difficult question of we, on whose behalf and for whom do we speak? What is different now, I think, is that in the ongoing aftermath, we have come to realize 3 really important points. 1, that we are all in this together. Black, white, rich, poor, east, west, global north, global south. No matter how unequal the vaccine rollout. 2, that the things that we once thought of as independent and separate issues, social and racial justice, climate change, mental and physical health, and so on, are absolutely intertwined and interconnected. And 3, that we cannot go on doing the same thing, living in the same way, and expecting a different result. Can we press play? No. So sorry, this is a video. And if the tech guys can just hit play. No sound. Sorry about this, there's always technical hitches. The video has sound. Okay, I think we better stop the video, because without the sound it won't make any sense. Okay, I continue. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, just as all crises have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The rest of the world is watching this, so sorry. The first casualty of a conference is technology. So, although the end may now be in sight, we are still in the middle. We know that there was a past of relative stability and predictability, at least for some. There is now chaos and disruption, and there will be a different state to come. As this future unfolds, and it will, some of us will emerge stronger and more resilient, and for others, the future will be catastrophic. This is as true for organizations and institutions as it is for societies. In the sociologist Richard Sennett's book, Together, The Rituals, Pleasures, and Politics of Cooperation, which was published a decade before COVID, he describes what he calls the Great Unsettling that took place at the European Reformation, when the cooperative patterns of the Catholic Church were undermined by a new individualism. The old ways of living together began to look hollow and manipulative, but the new patterns of behavior were crude and disruptive. It took a long time for people to work out how to live with one another again. The same thing or something similar happened in the scientific revolution. And prior to the pandemic, there was the sense that we were still living through the great unsettling of the information technology revolution, workplaces shutting down, short-term jobs, and social media enabling us to make and lose connections in the blink of an eye. Yet during the pandemic, and even now, Zoom and Teams have quite literally kept us alive. So now there is another unsettling on top of a previous unsettling, making for even more insecurity and instability around how to navigate and negotiate these changes. But we have no choice, we must navigate them. Now more than ever, we must find ways to live and work together that deliver more than material profit. We must learn to negotiate difference that goes beyond the sign, beyond the performance. Cooperation requires skills, and skills require resources. Because it is hard to cooperate, it is much easier for those who already have plentiful resources. This past year has only reinforced that. Brexit notwithstanding, I have a British passport. I was vaccinated in the UK. I'm here today. If I had been vaccinated in Ghana, the chances are that you would be hearing from me via Zoom. Like many, I imagine, I found the prolonged period of remote working and connecting much easier when it involved those with whom I had already had a previous person-to-person encounter. Trying to generate a meaningful relationship with someone I've only ever met on screen was in the end far more difficult than I ever imagined. Trust, which is really the building block of any meaningful relationship, no matter how addicted we are to TikTok or Love Island, is remarkably hard to rely upon in the digital world. At an average age of 19.8, Africa is the world's youngest continent. With few exceptions, we also have the world's oldest leaders. Embedded in our demographic DNA is the conundrum between experience and expertise on the one hand, and idealism and innovation on the other, which we are all grappling with. I do not mean to suggest that age and innovation are mutually exclusive, far from it. But as Trevor Noah hints, and I pray that this video is going to work, in his interview with Greta Thunberg, there is something about age that translates into an urgency that I find inspiring. Play? Sound? Ooh. Sorry, guys. The UK government's Stay Home, Protect the NHS, Save Lives campaign was universally viewed as the most effective of the UK COVID's mantras, presented in March 2020 at the start of the national lockdown. What's remarkable about this message for me is that beneath its simplicity is another, much more complex message about society, trust, and togetherness. And now, really, unfortunately, what I'm about to say is going to make no sense at all because you haven't seen the video. But it was a video of Amanda Gorman speaking at the inauguration, and she ends by saying, "Justice isn't just is." So I'm slightly embarrassed to end this presentation performance, which wasn't really a performance, with a quotation from a motivational speaker. But it is one of the simplest and most profound statements I've come across in nearly 30 years as an educator and as a writer. I began this presentation talking about trust, and I would like to end it talking about imagination. If we cannot imagine a new kind of future together, which begins with holding a different image of one another in our mind's eye, we will never get around to building it. A week ago, I received a text message from a childhood friend who is now the mother of a 19-year-old. Architects are not the only professionals concerned with the future. In fact, as an architecture student, you're much more likely to feel as though it's the past you're studying, not the future. But every design, whether a building, a city, a society, is also a proposition that things can be done better, made better, planned better. She got it wrong. There is such a thing as a society. And my last video, which I really wish I could have played, would have ended this on a really positive note. Thank you very much. Thank you.